Welcome to State of the State. I'm John Carlevale, hosting this program with another State of the State host, who is today our guest. Welcome to State of the State, Dick August.
I'm very happy to be here, John, and I think this is our broadcast number 3.1.
3.1, could very well be.
Yeah.
I was looking for that information myself and couldn't find it, Dick. Thank you. We're going to talk with Dick, and he is going to share what he has been learning through his research about matters that are taking place in Israel, Ukraine, and in the United States. And as I went through my list of things, I kind of almost lost my breath a couple of times because they are very often things that we typically as Americans don't know very much about. So Dick, I suppose we should get started with my first question to you. Is the United States at war in Israel and against Iran?
Well, at the outset, let me make clear once again, John, that I am not a supporter of Hamas, and I'm certainly not anti-Semitic, but I think that the American people are not getting accurate information about what's going on in that part of the world. Clearly, we're properly focused on our national election that's coming up in a few days.
Of course.
When the results of that are known, I think a lot of this stuff will begin to come more to the surface. But the fact of the matter is that the United States Air Force is the only Air Force that flies the B-2 bomber. And 2 of those bombers flew to Yemen and attacked Houthi missile sites. So those are actually American pilots flying American planes that are attacking a foreign country. Are we at war? Well, I guess that would be the definite one way you could do it. And the second thing is the Biden administration has announced that 100 American soldiers from the Air Defense Artillery branch, which is a combat arm, are now going to be on the ground in Israel with a very, very advanced anti-missile system, much more advanced than anything else that's been there. And basically, our troops are the only ones that know how to operate, and we really don't want anybody else operating them because we don't want to understand the technology that's involved. So are we at war? I would say yes, and not only that, the fact is that the United States is supplying virtually all of the armaments that Israel is using in its war, as they are in Ukraine, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
And you know, Dick, I have to be transparent and honest with you. What you just told us has taken my breath away. Wow.
Well, talk about this air defense artillery system. It's being held up as, they call it the THAAD, T-H-A-A-D system. We only have a limited number of these rocket launchers. They do go up to high altitude, and that's why they're called high altitude aerial defense. Mm-hmm. We have a limited number of them, and we have a limited number of these rockets. The 100 troops that are on the ground are going to be targets if they start using this against incoming missiles. The big advantage of these is the sophisticated radar system that they have that would allow this system, say in Washington, D.C., they can detect a basketball bounced up like 500 feet in the air in South Florida.
Wow.
So that's why it's a very highly secret, and
of course,
it has been put out there. But the fact of the matter is there's a limited number of these anti-ballistic missiles. You have to fire 2 or 3 to hit one missile, and they take a long time to manufacture. So it's not like you fire one-on-one to try to hit an incoming missile that's traveling, 1,000 miles an hour.
I can't help but wonder, Dick, with all this information, and this is things that are actually taking place. Mm-hmm. What is the ultimate goal of Netanyahu's coalition government? And for that matter, what is the ultimate goal of the United States?
Well, it's not clear what the ultimate goal of the United States is, or what it's our real strategic interest is. The United States has been a supporter. We were the first nation to recognize the State of Israel when the United Nations created it in 1947. So our ties go back a long way, and we've always supported them. And the fact of the matter is, Israel probably would not be able to survive without the United States' support. And that is why in the Muslim community, we are regarded as the great Satan, because we are the big brother standing behind our little brother Israel. I'm not going to really get into whether morally we should defend Israel because of the religious implications of that. But our interest is really not clear beyond that. The Israeli objective, as stated by Benjamin Netanyahu in an English broadcast on an Israeli news outlet. He's speaking in English, so it's not a translation. The goal, when they say from the river to the sea, they are talking about a completely Jewish Israel that will not only encompass its present boundaries, but will also involve removing the Palestinian presence from the so-called West Bank, removing them from Gaza, moving up into the southern part of Lebanon, and the extreme leaders in his cabinet, namely led by the finance minister, have stated that their goals are beyond that, that they would like to see a greater Israel encompass Syria and Iran and Iraq, in addition to Lebanon. And that's, this is, I mean, militarily it's impossible, perhaps even with the United States support.
Well, you just kind of read my mind. That's a very lofty set of goals that they have. And, I immediately said, can they really accomplish that? And certainly, could they accomplish that without the help of the United States?
No. The population of Israel before this started was about 9 million. 1 million Israeli Jewish citizens have left. They've left the country because of the conditions that are there. You have to remember, the Israeli military is made up largely of reservists that are being called up. And so when they get called up, you're talking about the small businessmen, the doctors, the dentists, the lawyers, and they go up and they are experiencing casualties. There's about, on average, 1 Israeli soldier a day killed in Gaza, and perhaps between 3 and 4 per day killed in Lebanon right now. And so you multiply that by 2 or 3, and that's the number of wounded that are being taken as casualties.
Yes.
Both places. Netanyahu and the Zionist movement in Israel has made it clear that their goal for Gaza is to eliminate the Palestinian presence, certainly from the northern part of the country. And so they have essentially made the northern part of the country inhospitable. Their plan is to take over the seacoast. Apparently is very, I think we had a guest on, Rick Snyzik from the Rhode Island Catholic, who was there, and he said the seacoast is very picturesque, beautiful ocean, everything else. Apparently there's plans for resorts and condominiums. And the idea is they've already have, they're calling them settlers, ready to move into northern Gaza when the Israeli Defense Forces can say, you can move in there safely, we can protect you there. But this has been going on for 14 months, and they haven't been able to do it.
Dick, I have a question. I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but this sounds to me like Netanyahu's goals. But what about the rest of the Israelis who live in that part of the world? Is that their goals as well?
Most of the people in Israel, most of them, are on board with this because they're really reacting to the events of October 7th last year.
Of course.
And that was certainly horrific, but Hamas's goal in that incursion into into Israel was not to just go and mass rape and murder and kill babies. Their goal was really to take hostages, and so they can use them for exchange for Palestinians who are being held and tortured in Israeli prisons. And I think I mentioned this at the in the last interview. Between 1,200 and 1,500 Israelis were killed on that day.
Mm-hmm. On that day.
And now it's becoming very clear that many of those were caused by the Israeli Defense Forces' reaction to Hamas's incursion. It's also become very clear that there are Israeli reservists, most of them are women, who were on the border, and their job was to watch what was going on the other side, intelligence gathering. And for days, they warned the command that something was going on over there, and they were told, don't worry about it. So they did have warning. The Israeli Defense Forces intelligence people didn't share that with the Mossad, which is the equivalent of our CIA, or their equivalent of the FBI, their internal security. Mm-hmm. So there was really no communication, so they could say, well, this is what's adding up, this is what we're hearing too. But nevertheless, when that attack occurred, they had those border watchers were told, stand down. And so many of them were the women that were captured. And really for exchange. Now, I mentioned this before, that Israeli Defense Forces operate under a principle called the Hannibal Protocol, which simply means that Israeli forces are authorized to fire on any hostage-taking situation, so that when they launched about 12 Apache helicopters, they saw these hostages being taken away in various vehicles, and they opened fire on them.
It's a perplexing thing, Dick, because I can't help but think of what Hamas said and has said repeatedly, that their goal is to eliminate all Israeli people.
That's correct. That's the goal of Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. Yes, Hamas was put into power by the people with a question about whether or not that was actually a rigged election. In other words, they intimidated and, so that they took over for that. The vast majority of Gazans, I guess we can call it, Palestinians who live there, were not really in favor of it until Israel started doing what they're doing. And they actually destroyed the last hospital facility in northern Gaza. So the wounded and the sick have no place to go. There are videos of children that have been shot in the back of the head in Gaza, and these are not doctored videos. We're not seeing this here, but it is visible in other parts of the world, including the Middle East. But nevertheless, the vast majority of the Israeli public are still along the line that, yeah, we want to clean out certainly Gaza. They're probably not, maybe the West Bank too. But going into Lebanon, we've been there before. Under the Ronald Reagan's presidency, we supported and sent our own Marines into Beirut to act as peacekeepers among the various factions that were fighting at the time. Mm-hmm. The Israelis were there for 18 years, and they had a sector of the suburbs of Beirut that they were responsible for, keeping the various factions that were fighting, but they had a presence there. What happened was, as our Marines, and so there were soldiers there as well, manning some radar installations, when they began to come under fire, first by snipers, then by artillery and so forth, that's when Ronald Reagan called Ariel Sharon, who was at that time the Prime Minister of Israel, and said, if you pull out of there, you better pull out of there, because we're not going to support you any longer. Israel, they stopped their aggressive action right away, and then eventually pulled out, which left a vacuum that became a hot zone. And ultimately, people may remember that in October 23rd, 1983, resulted in the bombing of a barracks that we had in Beirut at the airport. 283 Marine soldiers and corpsmen were killed, and 9 of those were from Rhode Island.
Wow.
The state of Rhode Island suffered the highest casualty rate in that event of any other state in the Union. And we just erected, I was on a commission that found a place and designed a memorial to those 9 Marines that's in the 195 reclaimed land in Providence.
Dick, a question occurred to me when you were describing these goals and to take this land and that piece of land. And it seems that those goals run contrary to the two-state solution. And we have a number of people there talking about achieving a two-state solution. And I'm scratching my head. How we?
Because all they're doing is talking about it. Israel does not want a two-state solution. That is not their goal, at least of the present government. Now, there are people in the government, namely, there's equivalent, our Secretary of Defense is called the Defense Minister, is an opponent of Netanyahu, even though he's in the cabinet. And he's advised Netanyahu against doing some of these military actions, particularly the raid that occurred last Friday in Iran that's been given a lot of press about a great victory. And, well, the fact of the matter is it was actually a defeat for Israel. And I say that with some certainty because coming in from various sources other than our own press, but well documented. The Israeli Air Force flies F-35 stealth fighters, our most advanced fighter. It's actually an attack plane. Their plan was to have 3 waves or possibly 4 waves of aircraft attacking Iran in response to the missile attack on October 1st. Unfortunately, it didn't work. So most of their, if not all of their F-35s were launched in the first wave. Their goal, because they're supposedly stealthy, they can get in, radar can't pick them up, and they were going to use precision-guided missiles to knock out all of the Iranian anti-aircraft missiles, so that the second and third waves of our really obsolescent F-16 and F-15 fighters could go in and bomb other targets. What the Israeli Air Force found out was, lo and behold, about 30 miles off the airspace of Iran, they realized that they were being tracked. Notwithstanding that they're flying advanced F-35 fighter planes, which I think they're the only other Air Force other than our own, the Navy, the Marine Corps flying. That's their go-to plane now. The Israelis found out that somehow they were being tracked and they were no longer stealthy. Because Russia has apparently developed a radar system that will penetrate their stealth. And when they saw that, they knew that some of them were going to be shot down, and certainly the follow-on planes were going to be shot down. Now remember, Israel is launching manned fighter planes, bombers, fighter bombers. What's Iran using? Drones,
Yes.
unmanned aircraft, missiles. Now, so what happened was they actually fired their missiles 25 to 30 miles outside of Iranian airspace, and they called back the second and third waves. They didn't even launch them.
And that system made by Russians in Russia is not just in Russia, apparently.
No, it isn't.
It's also in...
It's probably in Ukraine. It's certainly guarding Russia. It's called SIAD system. And as a result, what happened when they launched their missiles, they were basically, they weren't precision guided anymore. And they rely on GPS, and then they have a radar system that'll take over for final targeting. Well, they couldn't do that. So they were kind of just firing away, and they're telling, oh, we damaged all these facilities. What they damaged were 2 obsolete radar installations on the Iraqi border with Iran, in Iran. One of them is used as a movie set for Iranian television and movie programs.
Oh boy.
And the other one was not, so that wasn't even an active site, and the other one was not totally damaged. So, see, we're being told it was this great victory in retaliation for the Iranian attacks. And they say, oh, well, the Iranians are firing these missiles. We were only aiming at military targets. That's because that's basically as close as they could get to anything. The Iranian attack on October 1st, they rained all these missiles down, and most of the ballistic missiles that were fired that hit the Iraqi Air Force base got through all those defenses, and that base is where the F-35s are launched from. So the Iranians were sending them a nice little message. They also hit with their missile the headquarters of Mossad, which would be like our CIA headquarters in Langley. They also hit what we would call the Pentagon, but their central military planning, where the general staff is. Those guys were like way down 6 stories underground in bomb shelters, but they actually heard what was happening. So what the Iranians have done is said, okay, we're going to just target military things, but this is what we can do. Because all those drones, we shot down all the drones, we shot down some of these unmanned aircraft. Yeah, because now what you're doing is revealing where your air defense facilities are. Now they know where those radar installations are and where the Patriot missile batteries are, and they're going to know where our American soldiers on the ground are going to be for the next one.
And Dick, my question has to do with Lebanon, because this is something that is not new to them.
Yeah.
And we can understand why there are so many supporters of Lebanon who live in the United States of America, because they see so many of their relatives, friends, and whatever, really suffering the brunt of much of this.
John, when I said the Hannibal Protocol means that collateral damage is acceptable to Israel. The United States military would never operate under the rules of engagement that the IDF is using. When they talk about taking out a Hamas leader, because they knocked out where he was living in a residential section, you drop a 2,000 or 3,000 pound bomb on an apartment building in a city, you're not just taking out that building.
Of course not.
And so there are dozens and dozens of civilians that are, quote, collateral damage to get one Hezbollah, in this case, not Hamas, but Hezbollah leader. And just they say, well, we've knocked out the head. Well, the Hamas, remember, the first response was that Israel went into a foreign country and attacked a Hamas leader in that country, in the consulate, which is sovereign territory for Iran. They went up into Tehran, the capital of Iran, and Mossad operatives assassinated the one guy in Hamas.
Hamas?
Hamas, who was supposedly willing to negotiate, but they killed him in a guest house in Tehran, which again is a foreign country. And they're saying, oh, well, we're responding. Well, the response when you kill a leader of another country in a separate country, what's the reaction supposed to be?
Sure. Yeah.
What would happen if we went into supposedly Iraq the second time because there was a plot against George H.W. Bush, President Bush 43's father.
Yes.
And so when 9/11 happened, this was another way that he was manipulated into invading Iraq for the second time, to take out Saddam Hussein, who had instigated an attempt to kill his father.
It's just the kind of thing that just keeps repeating itself. The faces change, the people who are in charge, and for me, you know, I mean, yeah, I'm, you know, I'm probably maybe naive about this, but, you know, I'm the kind of person that thinks, you know, we all ought to be able to live in peace with each other.
Well, that's a great goal, but
Yeah.
and it's not unreasonable if reasonable men and women sit down and discuss this
Exactly.
stuff. But when you have different, you know, people, we switch over to Ukraine if you want, because
Sure, let's talk about Ukraine.
all this stuff is making Putin like another Hitler. He's going to invade. This is his first step. He's going to invade Western Europe. The economies of Western Europe are in tatters. Russia has done this. They've been there. They've done that. Putin has never said that they have any intention of doing anything other than making the West, NATO, and which means basically the United States, to live up to the agreement that was Ukraine was supposed to be a neutral territory. And in 2014, our CIA led an overthrow of the last democratically elected president of Ukraine. And we installed a puppet president who was then subsequently been replaced by this guy Zelensky, who was a Russian-speaking, B-rated comedian. And we're propping him up now.
Yeah, I just wonder how many Americans are aware of that.
I don't know, John. I mean, I can't imagine the feedback we might get from this. But, you know, this is not speculation. I mean, I've listened to numerous sources about this. This is not a big mystery to those people who are interested. People only listen to what we're being fed by I call it the state-sponsored media. They're speaking what the administration wants them to say. This guy, Radinsky, we have shoveled billions of dollars into Ukraine. And everybody thinks, oh, well, it's good military. No, it's also to prop up Zelensky's government. We're paying the pensions of retired bureaucrats in Ukraine.
Oh, my.
Yes. And millions of dollars that have been shoveled in there have mysteriously disappeared. But Mr. Zelensky has purchased a nice home in Orlando, Florida, and another villa on the northern Italian coast.
Really?
Yes. So he's already got plans. He's going to he'll get out of town when he has to and hide somewhere.
Well, wasn't he wealthy to begin with? No, he wasn't.
No,
Okay.
he was a B-rated comedian. And somehow they picked him out and said, okay, they put him in there. Now, the other thing is, Zelensky's signing all these treaties and everything. He's no longer the president. He suspended, he's term limited, and he suspended the elections. So he's a fake president.
So his term ended some time ago.
About 6 months ago now. And he just suspended the election. And anybody in the media that speaks out against him gets jailed. And
It sounds
everybody's
like similar practices next door.
Yeah, well, people are being led to believe that there's some hope that Ukraine can win this thing. They cannot win. They cannot win. They don't have the manpower to do what, you know, Russians took casualties at the beginning, and now it's reversed. Russia has installed 5 defensive lines protecting the area that it's already secured. And now they're making inroads further beyond that. Last summer, when they were talking about the summer offensive, Zelensky and the Ukrainian forces massed every possible available man that they could. And there's actually videos of, I call them impressed gangs, riding around in vans, and guys walking down the street that look like they're military age and fairly good shape. They were being pulled into these vans with their wives or girlfriends screaming, and they were sent to a very brief basic training and then sent up to the front. That summer offensive got as far as the first defensive line, and they were pretty much wiped out.
Wow.
So Russia is now moving gradually. Putin has no designs on taking over all of Ukraine, but he is not going to give up the territory that's been paid for with Russian blood. Moreover, some of these Ukrainians were on video, recent video that came out, I think about a week ago, or at least it became public in the West. a group of Ukrainian citizens approaching the Russian lines with a white banner. Ukrainian artillery opened up on them. And so there was like an abandoned bunker, and the people scrambled into it, and then the Ukrainians sent a couple of drones in there to kill them.
You know, Dick, on one of our previous discussions, we talked about the original understanding that existed between the Soviet Union and this new group of nations.
NATO. It was NATO.
NATO. And maybe it would be appropriate to kind of remind people of what happened, because I think that most of us here in America probably don't even know what the conditions of the agreements were, and you know, what impact is it having now?
Okay. With the reunification of Germany, the Soviet Union basically, especially the so-called Eastern Bloc of nations, broke apart. Okay, Russia is now called the Russian Federation. It's no longer the Soviet Union. So countries like Poland, Romania, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, those countries separated. Ukraine, which means borderlands, was always regarded by Russia as a borderland, a neutral zone. That's where the Nazi invasion occurred, really, in the Second World War. So what happened was Ukraine actually possessed a number of nuclear weapons. That was where Russia had positioned them. Nobody, neither NATO or the United States nor Russia, wanted a nuclear little nation called Ukraine to be a nuclear power.
Sure.
So they agreed, we'll pull our weapons out of there, and in return, the agreement was that NATO will not try to incorporate these eastern states and move, in other words, move NATO up to the borderland, because NATO means North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which came upon the scene after World War II, when the so-called Iron Curtain came down. Winston Churchill's term, by the way. The Iron Curtain dropped, and Eastern European nations were basically puppet states of the Soviet Union. And NATO was a counterbalance.
And Dick, let me just kind of say this for clarity. And those countries that were involved all agreed that there would be no further growth or no additional countries being members of NATO.
Yeah, they weren't going to move to the eastern border. So, but what happened is, starting with the Clinton administration, actually, they began to talk about bringing other countries into NATO. And so, like Poland, all these countries began to fall. So a lot of those are now members of NATO. Ukraine was a different story. I mean, Putin and the Russian Federation made it very clear that this is our deal. This has to remain a neutral state, because we do not want you moving in missiles that can reach Russia and putting them in Ukrainian soil, which is half of the country is Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian. The other half is Ukrainian, which is closely related to Polish ancestry. And they said, okay, but gradually, this idea came under the Obama administration. They were following up on the Clinton administration, and they said, okay, they wanted Ukraine to not only belong to NATO, but they wanted it to become part of the European Union, the economic alliance of those countries. The last democratically elected president that I referred to, whose name escapes me for the moment, but he resisted that. He said, no, Ukraine is going to stay neutral.
So he was good with the original understanding.
Sure. Now, the eastern half, the Russian-speaking half, is where the industrial power is. The western half is agricultural and mining and timber and so forth. But they were happy with that. And he said no, and that's why in 2014, the Biden administration, through the CIA, orchestrated his overthrow. And people in this country have no idea what the power of the CIA is. But there is a very good book out there that was written in 2014 that outlines the history of the CIA from the OSS in World War II was a wellspring for the CIA, and the power and their objectives of influencing overseas foreign country elections. We talk about we don't want foreign influence on our elections. The CIA, and hence the United States, is well known as a influencer of a foreign election.
Now, Dick, I have a question that relates to the original understanding. And of course, it seems like that understanding has been dishonored, for lack of a better way of expressing it. So does that change the Soviet Union or Russia's view of how they're going to behave toward those states?
I think it does, but I mean, if you listen to the president of Hungary, the president of Poland, and so forth, they don't want any idea of NATO taking on Russia. I mean, that's not their goal. They want to make sure that Russia doesn't encroach on their territory, which it says has no intention of doing. And Poland is building a pretty powerful military force of its own, but there's no intention of doing that. And it's a balance of power. They know that's not the case, and that's why they don't really support what's going on in Ukraine, what we're doing there. There's no way that Ukraine is going to beat this Russian invasion. There's no way. Look, Radimsky came out with what he calls his victory plan, which calls for Ukraine's immediate joining of NATO, which would be a real tripwire, and more United States involvement, and certainly allowing him to use American-supplied missiles to fire into Russian territory.
And if I recall correctly, I seem to remember that Putin really had a very pronounced statement should that begin to happen.
Yep, because what he says is when that happens, even if they're launched, say an attack is launched from Poland, the American missiles or aircraft, that we are then regarded as a hostile party to this whole thing. Notwithstanding that now we are providing most of the weaponry used by Ukraine, to the point where they have worn out the 155 millimeter howitzer artillery pieces. They call them the tubes. The tubes are worn out because of the number of rounds that have been fired. We don't have them we can't replace them. We're not the arsenal of democracy that we were in the Second World War. Russia is. It takes Raytheon 1 year to make 550 Patriot missiles, anti-missile missiles, right? Which are in Ukraine and Israel. Remember?
Well, Richard, when you said that, I felt my blood chill, because if we can't replace those, doesn't that tell the rest of the world that we don't have the stuff we need? And doesn't that make us vulnerable?
A lot of the world is looking at that. There are 82 nations right now that have applied for membership in BRICS. How many Americans know what BRICS is?
Well, I'm not sure I know what it means.
The initials are BRICS. The 5 original members of BRICS are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And they got together and they said, well, you know, why should the United States be such a dominant part of foreign exchange? And more countries are going in, and they are seriously looking at whether or not the United States dollar should remain as the foreign reserve currency. In other words, you can take US dollars and trade them for goods in another country.
Sure.
You don't have to use your own currency, right? John, if they move away from that, our economy is going to be in really tough shape. So a lot of these people are looking at it, and they are looking at what the United States is doing, principally through the CIA and other economic measures, to influence what's going on in their countries. And Ukraine is just part of it. Now, the CIA has admitted that they have training bases in Ukraine where Ukrainians are the people that are sneaking into Russia, into Russian territory to launch terrorist incidents. They've acknowledged that they're doing it.
Yes.
So we're moving to closer and closer to the point where Russia's going to say, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Do you remember what we did when the Russians were going to put intermediate range missiles in Cuba?
Yes, I do.
Do you remember what we did in Grenada when a communist, a Russian-oriented government took over in Grenada? Yeah, we sent our forces down there because we were going to, quote, protect the American students at the medical school there.
Yes.
But that was the reason we did it, on the basis that, hey, we don't like this regime. So what I'm saying, John, and look, you know me, I'm a patriotic, loyal American, but we have to understand that people are starting to recognize there are limits to our power. If Raytheon can only produce 550 Patriot missiles a year, and remember what I said about the number of missiles that have to be fired to take down one incoming ballistic missile. That means if Iran or anybody else launches 20 ballistic missiles, we're going to exhaust an entire year's production of our Patriot missiles, a whole year. And what do? You know, they can't be really replaced fast enough.
Right.
On the other hand, the Russian economy has been geared up to a war footing, and they can replace this stuff.
That's a frightening notion.
It is.
It really is. And, you know, it's important for we citizens, Americans, to have some insight into this, because without it, I would say that we're likely to make decisions that are not in our best interest.
Well, we seem to be doing that because certainly,
Yes.
you know, right now, for example, the price of heating oil is pretty good compared to, it's lower than it was at this time last year.
Yes.
If Israel takes out the refining capacity, the refineries in Iran, or blocks the Strait of Hormuz somehow, it's going to be a crisis in this country for oil. We need energy to survive. With regard to Ukraine, it's going to take trillions of dollars to rebuild their economy. How many people know who Larry Fink is? He's the chairman of something called BlackRock,
Yes.
which is one of the world's largest investment bankers. And BlackRock is very much investing in raw materials, which there are plenty in Ukraine. And they are looking at this and saying, well, when this is over, this economy has to be rebuilt. And guess who's going to get the job?
Guess who?
BlackRock. You know, the old saying, follow the money. What was that, Jerry Maguire, the movie?
Yes.
Show me the money.
Show me the money.
John, that's all you have to do is follow the money trail. So I mean, I'm sure there's people that'll be watching this. We'll be doing this after the election. Don't be surprised if by the end of December, the United States pulls away from the involvement in Ukraine. See how what that premonition is. That it's very likely that after the election is over and done with, that there'll be no more real reason to kind of pretend that Ukraine is going to win or can win. And we'll back away just as we did in, guess what, Vietnam.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's probably a number of lessons here, Dick, that that our country as a governing body should be aware of, but also as citizens of this nation we ought to be aware of. So I think you just then touched upon what this means for the United States of America, given how things might go this way, that way, or another way. So maybe we have about maybe 15 minutes remaining, Dick, in our hour. You want to touch upon that?
Well, First of all, I mean, one of my questions is, where's Joe Biden? You know, he hasn't come out and talked about anything that's going on in Israel. I mean, he hasn't talked about anything ever since he was forced to announce that he wasn't going to run again. And I'm saying he was forced to do that by his own party. By all reports, that included at least one member of our congressional delegation who went to him and said, "You're not going to win, you got to back out."
Yes.
And now he seems to spend most of his time, well, it's winter now, so he's going to his home in the other home in Delaware, where, I forget where it is, yeah, Delaware, or Maryland, excuse me. And he's not going to the Rehoboth Shore anymore. But that's all he seems to be doing. And that could be because of reasons of health and otherwise. But it's noteworthy that the Harris campaign is actually not encouraging Joe Biden to go out on the road and campaign for her. So that should tell us something. I don't know who's really running the government, but it seems that Secretary of State Blinken, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and to some extent the Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin are really the ones that are calling the shots.
And
there.
they really seem to be like engaged, like I haven't noticed them to be prior to all of this.
Yeah. Well,
so I think that that's a legitimate observation.
Yeah, so that's a problem. It certainly isn't the vice president isn't doing it, because she doesn't seem to be able to articulate any policy decisions except to say, my team and I are going to study it, you know. And that's unfortunate. And, you know, I'm sure she's going to carry the state of Rhode Island, and we'll see what happens as of November 5th. And it probably won't be either until early morning hours of November 6th. And maybe not till December before we really know who the president is.
You know, I've been thinking about that recently, and I've had a couple of discussions with some friends who think that it may be a week or more before we really know.
Sure. Because some of the states are allowing these things to come in by mail. And
the mail ballots, they take a long time to count, and in some instances that can go on for a week.
Sure, not so much in Rhode Island because they are
we're small.
Well, and we're fed in electronically. But remember, it's up to the states how to conduct their elections, and in some cases the states have delegated that to counties, that the county board of elections, whatever they call it, says these are the rules. So when we say count the mail ballots, I just heard, I think today, an announcement that the Board of Elections in Rhode Island has said mail ballots have to be postmarked by 5 p.m. on November 5th in order to be counted, which says they are actually anticipating that some of the stuff that may be mailed might not come in until the 6th or 7th or 8th, depending on where you're mailing it from. And the rule used to be, most recent one that I heard was that you could actually go to the polling place and drop a mail ballot in until 4 p.m. or one of the drop boxes that are around.
Well, that's what I've been hearing on local television.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that hasn't even been modified a bit. Because in the polling place, are they going to send somebody over to guard the ballot box? So if somebody comes in at 5 minutes after 4, they're going to say, no, you can't put your ballot in? I doubt it.
Yeah.
So again, I think in Rhode Island, it's not going to take a week to do the mail ballots if they run them through the machine. It's very quick. But, I mean, it's still supposed to be open.
Not in Rhode Island, but it may take, who knows, a week or more in some states.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because they're so much larger. And then if they're distributing them or saying, you know, well, you folks can count them and then let us know how you make out.
And we know there's going to be states or cities that are, oh, gee, we just found some in the trunk of a car. It's some worker picked up and forgot to turn in. You know, that's why I hope that doesn't happen this time. But hey, who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, it's a difficult. Well, Dick.
Let me just go back for a second to your question about how much time do we have, because I wanted to say something about the American.
About 8 minutes.
Okay. People have no idea, and the candidates aren't really addressing this. what the size of our national debt means, which is now approaching $37 trillion, and we're spending money like we have it. People have to understand that the net interest on that debt is becoming the largest line item in the federal budget, larger than even what we spend on defense.
Yes.
And when that happens, now that means we either have to borrow money to pay the interest, which is a classic definition of insolvency, or we have to do something about reducing this. We just cannot continue to spend $1, $2, $3 trillion more than the government takes in. And there doesn't seem to be a great push to say somebody to come out, and I'm talking about either party, to say, no, we're going to get this budget back into balance. You know, in wartime, that's different. Now you're saying, well, okay, we got to do something. But now, theoretically, we're not supposed to be at war, but we're still spending billions of dollars in what I'm going to call them proxy wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine. In addition to that, people have to also understand that the impact of somewhere, perhaps as many as 20 million undocumented immigrants from all over the world are now in this country, demanding certain services. And there are NGOs, non-government organizations, that are making billions of dollars from the federal government to assist in dealing with this influx of undocumented people. 50 million people of our population today are not born in this country. 50 million.
Wow.
Now, you say, well, we're a nation of immigrants. Sure we are, but never anything like this. And our immigrants, I'm a second-generation American. When my grandparents came here, they intended to become Americans.
Sure.
And we had an industrial base that could support this. We needed workers. Today, I'm not sure that's the case. I mean, we don't have an industrial base really anymore. We have some, but you know, most of our stuff is like service-oriented and, quote, information technology-oriented. That doesn't take a whole lot of manpower running stamping machines and jewelry polishing machines and that kind of stuff, right? So, where are we headed?
Yeah, good question.
Well, I wish some politician would address that, but I think all this stuff is uncomfortable, and either party, I think, is reluctant to really come to grips with it because so many people are so unfamiliar or unaware of this. And certainly, this, I'm going to call them the TikTok generation, is not prepared to make the sacrifices that we came to expect, and we call them the greatest generation of World War II. That generation came out of the Great Depression.
Yes.
And on the day after Pearl Harbor, people were lining up to join the military, lines of people. And today, the military cannot even attract enough people. The Army is like 48,000 short of personnel. The Marine Corps is about the only one that seems to be okay, but even the Air Force. The Navy has had to retire 17 vessels, mothball them because they can't man them. They don't have the people to
And
send.
some of those vessels really require a lot of people aboard.
Yeah. And we're building these aircraft carriers that have like a small 5,000, 6,000 people on it.
Yes.
And that aircraft carrier takes about 6 years to build. In World War II, they were turning out aircraft carriers one a month.
One a month. It's amazing.
Right. And we look at we turned a whole industrial base over to war production. We were called the arsenal of democracy for a reason.
Yes.
Today, you can't do it. And today, to build, they can probably build one F-35 a month at Lockheed. I mean, they were turning out a fighter plane every day from 5 or 6 different plants in the United States.
It just sounds to me like, and this is a conclusion that I think one might venture, or I'll venture to make, that it seems that we have really worked ourselves into a very difficult situation that is going to be extremely difficult to rectify.
It's going to be extremely difficult. Unfortunately, John, I mean, people are going to think this guy's gloom and doom, Dr. Pessimism or something, but I think what it's going to take is a severe shock to this country economically and hopefully not militarily, that is going to start waking people up, and people are going to have to understand that, wait a minute, things cannot keep going the way they are.
Yes.
They just can't, because certainly the impact on, even on Rhode Island, of all these undocumented people that are being relocated here. I mean, we're hearing about small towns all over where they're simply overwhelmed by these people that come in and they want their kids to have school. They overwhelm the hospitals, they overwhelm the social services. No one can really tell us, John. I don't know anybody that's actually said this is how many of these people we have in Rhode Island that we are supporting.
Yeah. No, well, they're unwilling to tell us. Mm-hmm. I think that those numbers are known. But it seems to me, Dick, and I guess that we're about to end this discussion.
Gloomy discussion.
But I'll say that it's going to take some very outstandingly good leadership to say to the American people, we have some problems that we need to solve, or we're done for. Mm-hmm. And this is what we need to do. And my sense tells me that if we find that kind of person or group of people that are willing to take this on, more than half of our citizenship will follow.
When this is broadcast, John, we'll know who the president is. And I think that if it is Donald Trump for a second term, he's going to be term limited, is going to maybe provide a catalyst for this, maybe. Because he's term limited, he can do things, provided his party controls at least the Senate. If the Democrats control the Congress, he's not going to get anything done. Nothing's going to change until this shock occurs.
I agree with you, Dick, and I must say thank you for being a guest on State of the State. You've been watching State of the State, of course, and please join us again for the next edition of State of the State.